Hardy kept a mistress outside our marriage. She kept demanding a formal status. To appease her, Hardy gave her the role I had fought so hard to secure. He was confident I wouldn't divorce him. At the press conference for the new drama, he even boldly wore a matching couple's ring with her. During this live-streamed event, with tens of thousands watching, countless media cameras turned to me, waiting to capture my humiliation. But I calmly pulled out a divorce agreement. Hardy slammed the table in front of everyone and cut off all my brand collaborations. He even declared that within a month, I'd be groveling for forgiveness and reconciliation. Yet later, during a stormy night, the one speeding recklessly through the rain and standing at my doorstep, drenched and begging for another chance, was him. The recently returned man blocked the doorway and chuckled at Hardy. "Ex-husband, stop shouting. She's too tired to hear you." When the lead actress for the film As It Was officially announced, chaos broke out in my studio. "What's going on? They replaced the lead without a word. Why didn't anyone inform us in advance? We cleared the next 3 months just for this shoot, Crystal." My agent, Crystal, dialed the production team angrily, but they brushed her off with a few vague replies. Perhaps Nellie should call Mr. Hardy herself to discuss this. Hardy wasn't just the biggest investor in As It Was, he was also my husband. Everyone in the studio turned to look at me, their gazes urging me to act. I lowered my head to the script, my fingers icy cold as I stared at the lead actress's name, Phyllis. Rumors had long swirled that Phyllis was Hardy's mistress. Until now, I hadn't taken them seriously. We'd been married for years. Even if Hardy didn't care deeply about me, he'd never done anything so blatantly outrageous. But this time, to pacify his mistress's demands for recognition, Hardy had handed over the lead role I'd worked so hard to win. He knew exactly how much this role meant to me. I called him 3 times, but there was no answer. Crystal patted my shoulder to console me. "Ask him when he gets home. You sacrificed so much for this role, it's not worth losing it out of pride." But Hardy didn't come home that night. I sat on the couch, waiting from dusk until dawn before he finally returned. He gave me a fleeting glance, showing no intention of explaining himself. I finished my tea, looked up, and asked, "Why was I replaced?" "Because I wanted to replace you," Hardy replied indifferently. Then, tilting his head, he smirked. "What? Are you upset?" Hardy always knew how to provoke me with the simplest words. He walked over, leaned down slightly, and looked at me with mocking curiosity. "A star like you, who prides herself on earning everything on her own, upset over a measly lead role." His tone was dripping with ridicule. Hardy had once gripped my chin and said, "Nellie, as long as you please me, I can elevate you to any position you desire." Now, through his actions, he was showing me just how wrong I'd been to reject him back then. In the past, I wouldn't have bothered to argue with him. But this time was different. As It Was held all the cherished memories of someone and me. Crystal's words echoed in my mind as I suppressed my emotions and said softly, "I spent months preparing for this role." "I know," Hardy interrupted nonchalantly. My lashes trembled as I looked up at him. "You want the role back?" he asked, his eyes glinting as he leaned closer. "What can you do?" "Because I don't want to give it to you." The conversation ended bitterly. Crystal tried to comfort me several times, but I eventually spoke, my voice hoarse. "It's not a matter of pride. Hardy knows how much this means to me. He's doing this on purpose." Crystal froze mid-sentence, then looked at me for a long moment before murmuring, "What kind of marriage is this?" Indeed, what kind of marriage was this? It was always a transactional arrangement. Hardy brought wealth and status, and everyone assumed I clung to him desperately. But no one knew that Hardy had once promised to love me, word for word. Before I could even agree, my family had accepted on my behalf and sent me to Hardy's side. Over time, however, Hardy began to clash with me, as if out of spite. When drunk, he'd question me repeatedly. "Nellie, am I so unworthy of your love? Without me, would your family have what they do now? Isn't pleasing me your family's specialty?" He relished looking down on me in my despair. With a voice that seemed both pitying and seductive, he'd whisper, "Beg me, Nellie." Hardy knew I'd never lower myself to beg. And he was certain I wouldn't divorce him, for my family's sake. So, time and again, he humiliated me, delighting in my public disgrace. Hardy made an offer. If I stood outside the grand banquet 2 nights later holding a cake to welcome him, he returned the role to me. Crystal's face darkened. 2 nights from now. Everyone important in the industry will be there. Making you wait outside is pure humiliation. He's handing the role to Phyllis anyway. Does he really need to do this to you? Crystal advised me to give up on the role, but I agreed. Is this film really so important to you? She asked. I nodded lightly. Yes. Very important. It rained heavily that day. I stood at the banquet entrance with an umbrella as passing glances and murmurs pierced through the storm. I heard she's doing this to win Hardy's favor. Why bother acting so high and mighty before? She has no status or background. Of course, she has to resort to desperate measures. So humiliating. What a pity, though. I lowered my gaze, watching the rain stream along the edge of my umbrella. It wasn't until midnight that I realized what they meant by pity. Hardy never showed up. Soaked to the bone, I became the night's laughingstock. My fingers trembled from the cold as I dialed Hardy's number, but it didn't go through. Instead, I received a text from an unknown number. Heard you waited all night. So sorry. Hardy flew to S-City to celebrate my birthday, hehe. Attached was a photo of an exquisite birthday cake. I stared at it for a few seconds before tossing the cake aside and walking away. Hardy never returned my calls, but he updated his Instagram. The post was deleted quickly, yet someone still managed to screenshot it. In a romantic Ferris wheel, the glass reflection faintly showed 2 people kissing. Crystal flew into a rage, furiously cursing Hardy as a scumbag. Rumors in the circle always spread quickly, and I became a laughingstock for everyone. Even so, I still didn't get back the role. Hardy looked at me, his smile reaching his eyes. Nellie, even if you had come, I might not have given the role back to you. After all, I never promised you. His tone was always light and indifferent. A chill ran down my spine, and I raised my eyes to glare at him. Perhaps my desperate look amused him because Hardy laughed even harder, lowering his head. Nellie, it's been a while since I've seen you like this. But this role has already been decided, there's no changing it. Still, I won't let you wait in vain. How about this? He leaned closer, his voice carrying a hint of laughter. From now on, you can pick any script you want. Hardy. I suddenly interrupted him. I lifted my head and locked eyes with him for a few seconds. Calmly, I said, let's get a divorce. The smile froze at the corner of Hardy's lips. His gaze fell on me, scrutinizing. No one ever told you, he said, raising a hand and tracing a finger across my neck, that some jokes shouldn't be made lightly. The project your family's company is negotiating right now, one word from me, and it'll fall apart. As if to prove his point, the moment he finished speaking, a notification from my family popped up on my phone. I closed my eyes. I didn't need to look to know the message would be about how I should accommodate Hardy. Hardy lowered his gaze back to me, his eyes once again filled with amusement. He spoke in a soft yet unwavering voice. Nellie, you can't leave me. After that day, Hardy began pampering Phyllis in a vengeful way. Whatever she wanted, Hardy made sure she got it. Phyllis frequently sent me texts. Hardy gave me a limited edition bracelet. I heard it's the one you've always wanted. Thought I'd show you. Thanks to you, I wouldn't have met such a wonderful Hardy. Oh, by the way. Don't bother waiting. Hardy insisted on taking me to watch the fireworks. The numbers kept changing, as if blocking them would never be enough. The better Hardy treated Phyllis, the more rumors about me flooded the internet. They spread like wildfire. Thank goodness Nellie finally ruined herself. Marriage of convenience? True love triumphs, okay. When will the old hag Nellie step aside for Phyllis? Divorce? As if she'd ever dare. Everyone was convinced I wouldn't dare to leave Hardy. Including him. He snatched my phone and stared at the screen, reading the comments for a few seconds before looking up at me with a smile. So, you do care. Then why not just yield to me? He leaned closer, the smell of alcohol in his breath as he murmured near my ear. Nellie, just give in. Say something I want to hear. Whatever Phyllis has, I can give you too. I raised my eyes and looked at him calmly. That night, my demand for a divorce hadn't left any impression on him. In this play, Hardy was always behind the scenes, directing. He understood better than anyone how much public opinion could affect me. And yet, he just wanted to watch me lose all dignity. To see me cornered. To see me beg him. But I wouldn't. I pushed him away and said, "Don't come near me. You're filthy." Hardy froze in place, his expression paling. When my parents called me again, I finally went back home. As I opened the door, the house was filled with people. They didn't greet me warmly. Their displeasure with Phyllis's existence was evident. My father spoke first, blaming me. "Is it so hard to keep Hardy happy? Do you see what's being said about us online now?" I chuckled. "So you're aware of how they're talking about us?" His face darkened. "No matter what, we can't afford to lose this project. You can't make any mistakes." I nodded. "The project won't fail. But this will be the last time." The relief on his face barely settled before it vanished again. "What do you mean by the last time? All these years, our family has benefited enough. It's time to stand on our own. This project will be my last act of endurance. And once it's done, I'll divorce Hardy." Before I could finish, his hand came down on my face without hesitation. "What do you think you are? Without the support of Hardy's family, would you even have what you do today?" My head turned from the slap, and a stinging pain spread across my cheek. But I ignored it, turned back, and calmly finished my sentence. "From now on, Nellie will have nothing to do with you." Whatever else they said, I didn't hear. I didn't want to hear. They raised me all these years, but once this project ended, our ties would be severed completely. After years of wandering aimlessly, I could finally see the end. As I stepped outside, I looked up at the sky. The sunlight was blinding, burning tears into my eyes. For a long moment, I stood there. Then a notification brought me back to reality. A headline about a new heir to a prominent family was trending. Matthew. I stared at the name, caught in a whirlpool of memories. That night, I had a dream. It was a quiet, warm afternoon. I turned the last page of a book and waved to the boy sitting in the sunlight. "When I become an actress, I want to play the lead in this story," I told him. He squinted and asked why. I ran into his arms and said, "Because I love this story. The leads are together forever." He chuckled. "But outside the story, so will we. And I'll see our Nellie become a great actress and play the lead in this book." But later, I was the one who pushed him away. On a rainy day, he gripped his umbrella and sneered, "Yeah, the male lead was never me." I woke up with a start, sweat beading my forehead. The pitch-black room felt like an airtight net, suffocating me. The day the project was finalized happened to coincide with Hardy's company's new product launch. The event was abuzz with excitement. Rumors had spread that Hardy would bring Phyllis to the launch, and the media flocked to the scene, drawn by the scent of scandal. Before leaving, Crystal tugged at my sleeve. "Do you really have to go? If Hardy did bring Phyllis to such a formal occasion, it would undoubtedly humiliate me." I nodded. Crystal opened her mouth to protest but froze, her expression changing drastically. I looked down at her screen. The live broadcast of the event was showing Hardy and Phyllis together. Even their outfits were carefully coordinated. The media, ever eager for drama, zoomed in on their matching couple rings. The room exploded with excitement. The live chat scrolled rapidly. "Mr. Hardy really brought her along. Matching couple rings, this is too much. Does he think Nellie won't dare file for divorce? Like she ever would. Her family depends on." I didn't keep watching. Instead, I went to find Hardy. The moment I arrived, countless eyes turned toward me. Their looks were filled with anticipation, as if waiting for a show to unfold. Phyllis spoke up with a smile. "Don't misunderstand. I insisted Mr. Hardy buy me this matching ring." "Oh." I gave her a brief glance. "It looks like the ring Hardy bought for me that I didn't want and left unused. If you like it, you can have it." Phyllis's face turned pale instantly. Hardy looked up at me, slightly surprised, and lowered his voice. "What's this? Finally willing to come to me first?" I nodded. "Yes, I do have something to discuss with you." He suddenly chuckled and looked down. "Nellie, I told you can't live without me. But coming to beg me now, isn't it a little too late?" From the moment Phyllis appeared, I was destined to become the city's laughingstock. That was exactly what Hardy wanted to see. Humiliating me was his favorite tactic. Hardy's voice wasn't loud but carried just enough for everyone in the room to hear. As he spoke, the gazes on me turned even more contemptuous. So Nellie really came to beg him. I'm dying to see what she'll say. These murmurs reached both Hardy and me. His smirk deepened as he leaned back, adjusting his posture, clearly ready to watch me speak. I stared at him calmly and, under the gaze of everyone around us, pulled a divorce agreement from my bag. It's not too late, I said, handing him a pen. If you don't mind, just sign here. Hardy's smirk froze the moment his eyes landed on the agreement. The lively atmosphere around us instantly turned cold, silence engulfing the room. What does this mean? He asked, his voice tight. You're not here to beg. Gritting his teeth, he enunciated every word. Nellie, do you dare to divorce me? It was rare to see Hardy in this state. He stared at the divorce papers for a long time, then laughed out of anger. Don't tell me you think Hardy's family supports just one project like this? I'll give you time to think it over. Hardy handed the divorce agreement back to me. Nellie, take it back now, and I'll act like none of this ever happened. No need to think about it, I replied calmly, meeting his gaze. Sign it. Hardy was convinced I wouldn't leave him. I was equally sure that someone as prideful as him wouldn't reject me in front of so many people. The whispers in the crowd grew louder. Media cameras pointed at Hardy one by one, clearly savoring this juicy drama. Hardy scanned the room, his face darkening by the second. With a bang, he slammed his hand on the table, gripping the pen so tightly his knuckles turned white. Fine. Nellie, it won't take long. You'll come crawling back to me like a dog. The divorce news quickly made it to the trending searches. My parents arrived faster than I expected. The moment my father raised his hand, I took a step back, avoiding his slap. His face was pale with anger as he lashed out at me, furious at the idea of offending Hardy. He hurled the most venomous words he could muster. I stood on the overpass, watching him lose his temper while people bustled around us. Instead of venting on me, maybe you should think about the future, I said calmly. I'm done being the sacrificial lamb. My father left in helpless fury. Even long after he was gone, I stayed there, unmoving. As night fell, I bought a few bottles of alcohol and sat on the overpass, drinking slowly. The rain started, cold and piercing, yet not a single drop touched me. A quiet umbrella appeared over my head. The fingers gripping the handle were just as beautiful as I remembered them years ago. My eyelashes fluttered. Half a mouthful of liquor got stuck in my throat, and I couldn't say a word. I never thought Matthew would want to see me again. In all the ways I'd imagined us meeting, I never pictured us silently drinking together under an overpass. The sound of raindrops filled the silence. Neither of us spoke. Half drunk and dizzy, I finally heard him murmur, "You're not doing well." My hands trembled, clutching the bottle as I avoided his gaze. Matthew leaned closer, his voice rough. "Why won't you look at me? I was the one who pushed him away. I didn't deserve to want him again. Maybe it was the alcohol, or maybe it was because I missed him too much." Facing him, I couldn't bring myself to push him away again. Frozen, I watched as Matthew's lips met mine. Warm and soft, his kiss brought tears to my eyes. When I regained my senses, I found myself in Matthew's home. The sound of rain continued outside, blending with the intimate atmosphere in the room. I clung to anything within reach, terrified this might just be a dream. The rain suddenly grew heavier. Biting my lip, I found myself losing control. His voice was low, coaxing, "Don't be so tense. Matthew." My words were swallowed by the sound of rain and his deep kisses. The stormy night stretched endlessly, as if the rain wouldn't stop. I woke up to the sight of chaos around me. Embarrassed, I wanted to flee. Matthew emerged from the kitchen, his gaze melancholic. "Are you leaving?" I froze, unsure how to respond. "It's okay," he said softly, lowering his eyes. "It was only 2 hours." Turning away, he added, "Go, if you want." I quietly ate breakfast but didn't dare to look up at Matthew. The moment our eyes met, memories of the harsh words I had said to him back then would come rushing back. I stayed silent, and Matthew didn't say a word either. After dropping me off at the studio, he left again. Before leaving, he said softly, "I'm preparing dinner tonight. It might be a bit much. If you don't want to come, that's fine. I opened my mouth, but before I could respond, Matthew had already driven away. I couldn't bring myself to refuse the Matthew who had returned. And, truthfully, I didn't want to. Lowering my gaze, I thought silently to myself, even if it's just for a brief moment, I'm content with this. Angering Hardy brought swift consequences. He cut off all my brand collaborations and publicly declared that I'd come crawling back to him within a month. I had expected Hardy to make things difficult for me but didn't anticipate it being this relentless. Hardy wanted me to bow my head. I became the target of online abuse, faced obstacles everywhere, and even roles I'd successfully auditioned for were replaced. Despite this, my agent, Crystal, never wavered in her support. Looking at her, I said, "This might be a tough time for a while." Crystal didn't say anything. Instead, she handed me a stack of documents. "Even tough times come to an end, Nellie. You're not someone who gives up here." Hardy's reach, no matter how long, couldn't cover the entire sky. Any role I could land, I would give my best performance. Hardy couldn't trap me forever. Matthew always picked me up in the evening to take me home for dinner. He never brought up anything about the past. This period felt so peaceful, almost as if we'd returned to the very beginning of knowing each other. But unlike his easygoing demeanor during the day, at night, Matthew was especially persistent. He had a habit of lightly biting my earlobe, repeatedly coaxing me during moments of passion. "What do you want? Say it." I looked up at him in distress, unable to form a complete sentence. But Matthew was patient, his fingers gently tracing along my neck. He insisted on waiting for me to speak. It felt like a lone boat on an endless sea, swaying helplessly with the waves. I couldn't escape, nor could I break free. During this period after our divorce, Hardy still hadn't given Phyllis a proper title. Crystal showed me a video, its background dim and seemingly from some bar. In the video, Phyllis was crying her heart out, choking as she asked Hardy, "You're divorced now. Why can't you give me a place by your side?" Hardy laughed and replied, "What place? That position is already taken." He toyed with the ring in his hand, his tone resolute. "Nellie will come back." I couldn't help but laugh at that. Hardy was still waiting for me to return. That's why he kept a close watch on my every move. Anything I touched, he would interfere with. After countless failed auditions, someone finally broke the silence. "It's not that you don't meet our requirements, it's just Hardy. Miss Nellie, why don't you stop being so stubborn with Hardy? Apologize, soften up, and all these problems will disappear, won't they?" I let out a laugh. "Apologize? What have I done wrong? Leaving Hardy is the one thing I'll never regret." The moment those words left my mouth, a sharp crack echoed from behind me. I turned out of curiosity to see the door slowly open. Behind it, Hardy's face was darker than ever, his cold smile etched deep into his expression. "Nellie," he said, his voice chilling. "What did you just say?" Hardy had never considered the possibility of me leaving him. He had always believed I'd hit a dead end and come crawling back. But he waited for a long time, and I never returned. Hardy began to sense something slipping out of his control. So he doubled down, using every possible means to trap me. But unfortunately for him, he never got the outcome he wanted. That's why he showed up here to hear my answer in person. He didn't expect to hear this. Hardy was furious. Sensing the tension, everyone else tactfully left the room. Just as I was about to leave, Hardy grabbed my wrist. He looked at me, his gaze unwavering. "Have you had enough?" I stared back at him, bewildered. "Without me, your father's company is already in chaos. And look at you, a complete mess." Hardy reached out, brushing my hair as if in pity. "Nellie, don't you understand? You can't live without me. Just ask me." His tone suddenly shifted as his gaze fell on my neck. His expression darkened, terrifyingly so. "What's this?" he asked, his voice sharp. I reached up to touch my neck. Before leaving home, I had deliberately chosen a turtleneck sweater to cover the marks from last night, but it clearly wasn't enough. Hardy's eyes locked onto the kiss marks, and he lost control. His grip on my hand tightened as anger seeped into his voice. "Nellie, what is this? Let go, Hardy." Pain spread from my wrist as I struggled to break free. Finally, I slapped him hard across the face, with enough force to make my fingers go numb. Hardy turned his head from the impact, visibly calming down as he released my wrist. He swallowed hard and said in a low voice, "Explain." "I'm listening." Straining my collar, I looked at him and laughed. "What are we to each other? What's there for me to explain?" "Nellie." Hardy frowned deeply. "Don't call me that. And from now on, my father's company has nothing to do with me. Don't use them to threaten me. As for the tricks you're pulling to make my life difficult, go ahead. I'll take you on. But Hardy, you can't trap me." With each word I said, Hardy's face turned paler. He stared at me for a long moment, disbelief in his eyes. "You mean it wasn't because of Phyllis, or out of spite, that you divorced me? From the start, you genuinely wanted to leave me? Nellie, all these years, have you never felt anything for me?" I looked at him and said, "That's right. Never. From the day I married you, I made it clear." Hardy shook his head, his expression cold as he laughed bitterly. "Nellie, I don't believe you." Hardy started showing up around me more and more. Every time he appeared, my auditions would somehow fall apart. He would just stand there, watching me indifferently. Crystal was ready to explode at him multiple times, but I shook my head and said, "Hardy never lets go of grudges. Don't offend him because of me." Hardy was showing up far too often. I instinctively began avoiding Matthew, not wanting to drag him into this mess. Right then, I landed a role as a malicious supporting character. It was surprising to even get an offer at this point. But when I saw Phyllis, who I hadn't seen in ages, suddenly cast as the lead actress, I finally understood. Phyllis joined the production specifically to make things difficult for me. What she didn't expect was that this role wasn't something she could just breeze through. One scene took countless retakes because of Phyllis. The crew grew visibly frustrated with her lackluster performance. Phyllis, livid, turned her gaze to me and sneered. "How can anyone perform with such an eyesore around?" I found her equally annoying. On my way out, I turned back and said, "Make sure you hold on tight to the position you climbed up to. One slip, and the fall will be brutal." Phyllis was furious. I could imagine her frustration over Hardy losing interest in her, so she set her sights on me. But relationships based on looks never last. The sunset that evening was beautiful. I looked up at the sky. For someone like me, just having a chance to be in the cast was already rare. Taking every role seriously and staying true to myself was all I needed. It was a month later when I saw Matthew again. Afraid of involving him, it had become a habit to turn and walk away the moment I saw him. But this time, Matthew was faster. He grabbed my wrist before I could leave. "Stop hiding." The weather was freezing, and his words seemed to carry the chill. I had no idea how long Matthew had been waiting at the studio entrance. His fingers were ice cold. He looked at me, his eyes full of sorrow. "I know you're avoiding me because of Hardy. If you don't want me around, Nellie, I won't come looking for you." "But..." He looked at me with a bitter smile. "After everything he's done to you, are you still going to choose him?" I froze, staring at Matthew, feeling a sudden pang in my chest. Years ago, he had stood before me just like this, smiling as he said, "Yeah, I was never the main character, was I? Back then, I was too weak." Pressured by my family, I said harsh words to Matthew and even admitted to loving Hardy. I never imagined Matthew would misunderstand me like this now. Before I could respond, Matthew let go of my hand. He looked down, forcing a casual smile. "I get it. You've already said it, I'm not the main character." He nodded, still smiling. "It's my fault." "Matthew," I interrupted, feeling a sting at the tip of my nose. Before he could finish his sentence, I grabbed his collar, closed my eyes, and kissed him. Matthew froze. My voice was hoarse as I murmured, "Matthew, I love you. I've always loved you. I didn't choose Hardy. I was just afraid of dragging you down." Matthew's eyelashes trembled slightly. "And now, I'm more afraid of losing you. I had been too weak before, and we missed out on too much because of it. This time, I didn't want to push him away again. Matthew's lips curled into a faint smile. He gently slid his fingers into my hair, deepening the kiss. Through the haze, I heard the rest of Matthew's unfinished sentence. But even if I'm not the main character, I still love you. After that day, Hardy, who had always been clingy, suddenly disappeared. I asked Matthew, "Was this your doing?" He was drying my hair, his expression in the mirror unusually serious. "I know you want to make it on your own, so I've stayed out of it until now. But this time, it wasn't because of you. Hardy's family has monopolized resources for too long. It's time for someone else to take a piece of the pie. So, I gave him a little trouble to keep him occupied. Company matters should be enough to keep him busy for a while." Matthew didn't like talking about Hardy and quickly changed the subject. "Our star actress Nellie, you have to keep pushing forward. I know you've given it your all for us before, so don't be too hard on yourself. From now on, just keep moving forward. If you're ever tired, I'll always be here for you." Matthew was always like this, gentle and reliable. At that moment, I made up my mind that I couldn't let myself become a burden to him. At least for now, I wasn't a match for him. For the next few months, I poured everything into my work. Every role I took on, I approached with utmost dedication. I wanted to stand beside Matthew on my own merit. But it wasn't until later that I realized the small trouble Matthew mentioned had plunged Hardy into months of crisis. And Matthew's return this time was all about dealing with Hardy. Phyllis's terrible acting as the lead landed her on the trending topics, drawing widespread ridicule. Meanwhile, my portrayal of the malicious supporting character, wildly unhinged but consistent, unexpectedly made me a hit. My family skyrocketed by millions, and the influx of brand collaboration offers left Crystal overwhelmed. On New Year's Eve, Crystal hugged me in a rare moment of sentimentality. She said she had seen me struggle all the way through, how Hardy had squeezed us so hard that even drinking cold water felt like swallowing nails. But we had gritted our teeth and endured. Thankfully, things were finally getting better. Crystal mentioned how my live announcement of divorce back then had shocked her, but she had fully supported me and never planned to leave, no matter how hard things got. As she spoke, my eyes began to mist. Crystal told me to hold off on crying and instead explain what was going on with Matthew. I froze. My tears dried up, and my face turned red. Matthew and I had been trying our best to keep our relationship low-key. Because I feared I wasn't good enough for him back then, I kept striving to become better. But it was obvious I couldn't fool Crystal. She patted my head and said, "As long as you love him, it's fine. But Matthew is no ordinary man. And I've heard Hardy's still asking around about you. But our Nellie is doing better now, with an even better partner. I love to see Hardy's reaction when he hears about it." I laughed and told Crystal not to bring up someone so unlucky on New Year's. But Hardy was destined to bring misfortune to the very end. He came looking for me. It was New Year's Eve, and I didn't want him to ruin my mood, so I prepared to leave immediately. But he blocked my way again and again. "Nellie, it's New Year's already. It's been months. How long are you going to keep this up?" I shoved my hands into my pockets and looked at him in silence. "I've been waiting for you to come back and apologize," Hardy said, frowning. "But you're just so stubborn, refusing to bow your head to me. You left on your own for so long," he continued, looking down at me. "I can let it go." "Nellie," Hardy sighed, softening his tone. "If you just say one word to me, anything conciliatory, I'll let bygones be bygones. I can give you the resources and brands you want, deliver them to you on a silver platter. All I need is for you to yield." Hardy sounded sincere, but I couldn't hold back a laugh. I thought he might have changed over these months, but nothing about him had. "Hardy, there's only one thing I want to say to you now." Hardy leaned closer. "Get lost," I said softly. "Nellie." Hardy's face darkened instantly. "I came to you personally. What more do you want? Why do you think I'd ever come back to you?" I asked curiously. "From the very beginning, you and the others never saw me as a person. You gave them resources, and they handed me over to you. No one ever asked what I wanted. I was just an object in your transactions." Hardy cut me off. "That's because I truly like you. I really wanted to marry you. But you never respected my choices," I said, my voice cold. "Hardy, Your so-called love is as cheap as you are. Hardy was about to retort when Matthew suddenly appeared. Well, Mr. Hardy, you still have time for romance here. Have you sorted out the company's issues? The moment he opened his mouth, Hardy's irritation skyrocketed. It seemed Matthew had indeed caused Hardy quite a bit of trouble recently. Narrowing his eyes at Matthew, Hardy asked, "What are you doing here?" "I'm here to pick up my wife," Matthew replied casually. Hearing this, Hardy suddenly grew alert. It was New Year's Eve. Most people had gone home by now. Hardy glanced around the room before his gaze reluctantly landed on me. He watched helplessly as Matthew walked over, adjusted my scarf, put a hat on my head, and gently pressed a kiss on my forehead. And then, Hardy lost it. "Nellie, who is he?" He stared at me intensely. "Nellie, come here. Don't stand next to him." Standing in the darkness, Hardy's voice trembled. "Did you choose him because of Phyllis? Are you trying to spite me? I've already cut ties with Phyllis. She won't appear in our lives again." "Nellie." I raised my hand to adjust Matthew's scarf and turned to interrupt Hardy's pleading. "Hardy, do you remember what I told you before? That I've never had feelings for you. Because I've always had someone I really, really liked." "Stop," Hardy murmured, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Nellie, please don't say it." Holding Matthew's hand, I looked at Hardy calmly and firmly. "And now, the person I like is back." Hardy ended up in the hospital that New Year's Eve. Courtesy of Matthew. Hardy had grabbed my wrist in a frenzy, refusing to let go. Matthew punched him without hesitation. Afterward, Matthew led me to an empty space, carefully retied my scarf, and told me to wait there. When he returned, he was injured but smiling. "It hurts," he admitted. I glanced at Hardy, sprawled on the ground, having taken a thorough beating. Hardy spent New Year's Day in the hospital. He was despondent for a long time afterward. When Crystal brought it up, she couldn't hide her amusement. The next time I saw Phyllis, the tables had turned completely. I was a leading actress. She had been demoted to an unknown supporting role, often scolded for poor performance and treated coldly on set. Passing by her, I smiled, just like that rainy night when I received her message. "I heard you wanted this leading role badly," I said lightly. "But sorry, I got it with my acting skills." Phyllis's eyes burned red with anger, but she couldn't do anything about it. Abandoned by Hardy, and lacking the talent to rise on her own, she began fading from the industry. After Hardy was discharged, he dropped his once lofty demeanor. He sent me all kinds of limited edition gifts, waited outside my building all night with a cake, and retraced every step I'd taken for him in the past. No one expected Hardy, once so proud and arrogant, to become so humble. Before this, Hardy had approached Matthew, trying to sow discord between us by bringing up the past. Matthew's response? "Nellie endured a lot while I was away," he said. "I can't bear to blame her. I only blame myself for being powerless and blind at the time. Love often feels like a debt to repay. Hardy, someone as selfish as you may never understand." I stood beside Matthew, crying uncontrollably. In the end, though it had been my fault, it was Matthew who comforted me for a long time. The pile of gifts from Hardy grew at our door. Matthew glanced at them quietly and asked, "What should we do with these?" Before I could answer, he looked away. "If you like them and want to keep them, that's fine," he said. "I won't mind." Smiling faintly, I replied, "Matthew, try being passive-aggressive one more time." Though outwardly gentle and understanding, Matthew made sure not a single box or ribbon from Hardy remained. The people waiting to see me go back to Hardy were left disappointed. Instead, they got news of my engagement to Matthew. The day after the announcement, it poured rain. Hardy, upon hearing the news, sped through the storm to our door, soaking wet as he knocked cautiously. "Nellie, is the engagement true? Nellie, are you mad at me? I sought out Phyllis just to make you care, to provoke some kind of reaction. I just wanted you to try loving me. I didn't know how to love before. Nellie, can you give me one more chance?" Hardy poured his heart out, but I wasn't there to hear it. Matthew, the scoundrel, had kept me up for hours that day. Exhausted, I was fast asleep. When the door opened, it wasn't me, it was Matthew. Leaning against the doorframe, He smiled a deceptively kind smile. Eavesdropping now, Mr. X. He quipped. Unfortunately, my wife is too tired to hear you. Oh, by the way, instead of drooling over someone else's wife, why not check on your company? I heard it's on the verge of collapse. Hardy, for once, didn't argue. His eyes reddened as he whispered, could I see Nellie, just once? Before he could finish, Matthew shut the door in his face. Our wedding was spectacular. On the same day, Hardy's family declared bankruptcy, and my father's company nearly went under. On his way to the wedding, Hardy got into a car accident. When Matthew heard, he smiled, his eyes curving. So many good things happening all at once, he remarked. That night, his mood grew even better. His breath was warm and teasing as he leaned close to my ear. Could we, tonight? He asked, wrapping a strip of cloth who knows from where around my wrist. Seeing it, I felt a bad premonition. Shaking my head hurriedly, I started to refuse, but he nodded understandingly. I get it. If you don't want to, that's fine, he said softly. But you did promise on our wedding day. Smiling sweetly, he added, really, it's okay. Matthew. Overcome by his charm, I nodded. The night stretched on. I regretted it many times but never found the chance to voice it. End of story.